The boy hadn't spoken in 47 days. Sarah Colvin knew this because she'd been counting, the same way she counted everything now. Steps from the train station to the boarding house, coins left in her purse, days until the rent came due, hours until she'd have to decide whether to eat or pay for another week's lodging. When you had nothing, numbers became the only certainty, the only thing you could control in a world that had proven itself viciously unpredictable. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house with her name written in bold, masculine script that suggested education and authority. Miss Sarah Colvin. Not Mrs., because everyone knew her story by now. The schoolteacher whose fiancé had died 3 days before their wedding, thrown from a horse during what should have been a simple ride. The schoolteacher who'd lost her position when the town decided a woman in mourning was too melancholy to teach children. The schoolteacher who'd been reduced to taking in mending and washing to survive, watching her savings dwindle like water through cupped hands. She'd opened the envelope with fingers that trembled from more than just the Denver winter cold. Miss Colvin, I am in need of a governess for my nephew, aged 9 years, who has recently come into my care following the tragic death of his parents. The position is located on my cattle ranch in the Wyoming Territory, approximately 60 miles from Cheyenne. The work will be challenging. The boy has not spoken since witnessing his parents' death and requires patience, firmness, and someone who will not coddle him into permanent silence. Room, board, and wages of $40 monthly. If you are interested in a position that will test every capability you possess, respond immediately to Garrett Kane, Twin Rivers Ranch, care of Cheyenne Post Office. $40 monthly. Sarah had read that line 5 times, certain she'd misunderstood. That was more than most ranchy. Foreman earned more than she could make in 3 months of teaching. It was enough to rebuild savings, enough to eventually afford a train ticket back east, where opportunities for unmarried women existed beyond washing other people's undergarments. It was also clearly a position no one else wanted. Men didn't offer that kind of money unless they were desperate. Sarah had written back that same evening. Now, 3 weeks later, she stood on the platform of the Cheyenne train station, her single trunk beside her, watching the late afternoon sun paint the eastern plains in shades of gold and amber. The mountains rose behind her, like a wall separating civilization from whatever lay ahead, their peaks still crowned with snow that wouldn't melt until June. "Miss Colvin?" She turned to find a man approaching, weathered, probably 50, with the kind of face that had seen every hardship the frontier could offer and had stopped being impressed by any of them. He wore a battered hat, canvas, coat, and an expression of permanent skepticism. "I'm Sarah Colvin. Tom Brennan. I managed Twin Rivers for Mr. Kane. He sent me to collect you." The man's eyes swept over her in quick assessment, taking in her worn traveling dress, her practical boots, her lack of excessive luggage. "You come prepared to work, or you planning to turn around and head back once you see how isolated we are?" "I came prepared to work, Mr. Brennan. I don't have the luxury of changing my mind." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps a degree less hostility. "That's honest, at least. Come on, then. We've got a hard ride ahead, and I want to make it to the ranch before full dark." "Have you ever made a decision knowing it would change everything, that there would be no going back once you stepped forward?" Sarah Colvin just made that choice. Stay with her. This story will break your heart and rebuild it stronger than before. The wagon was built for function rather than comfort, and the road, if it could be called that, was little more than twin ruts carved through prairie grass that stretched endlessly in all directions. They travelled northeast, the mountains shrinking behind them, the world opening into a vastness that made Sarah feel simultaneously insignificant and exposed. "Tell me about the boy," she said, after an hour of silence broken only by the wagon's creaking and the horse's steady rhythm. Brennan's jaw worked, as if chewing something bitter. "Name's Daniel, 9 years old. Smart as a whip when he bothers to pay attention, which isn't often anymore. Parents died 2 months back. Wagon accident coming back from Cheyenne. Wheel broke, wagon rolled. They both went over a cliff. Daniel was with them but got thrown clear. Broke his arm, some ribs, got cut up pretty bad. But the worst damage, Brennan tapped his temple. That's all up here. Saw his parents die and hasn't said a word since. Sarah's chest tightened with familiar grief. She knew what it was like to watch someone you loved die suddenly, senselessly. And Mr. Kane is his uncle, his father's older brother, different as night and day, those two. Robert Kane, that was Daniel's father, was a dreamer. Nice enough man, but never had much ambition beyond his small ranch and his family. Garrett Kane. Brennan paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Garrett Kane built an empire while his brother was content with 100 acres and a dozen head of cattle. An empire, Sarah repeated. The letter mentioned a ranch. That's like calling the Atlantic Ocean a puddle, miss. Twin Rivers is 40,000 acres of the best grazing land in Wyoming Territory. Kane runs 10,000 head of cattle, breeds horses that sell for more money than most men see in a lifetime, owns water rights that make him more powerful than any elected official in 3 counties. He started with nothing 20 years ago, just a strong back and a refusal to accept failure, and built it all himself. The pride in Brennan's voice was unmistakable. This was a man who'd watched his employer create something extraordinary. Why didn't he have children of his own? Sarah asked. A man that successful, surely he'd have married. Brennan's expression closed like a door slamming. That's a question for Mr. Kane, not for me. What you need to know is that he's a hard man, but a fair one. He doesn't tolerate laziness, dishonesty, or self-pity. He took Daniel in because it was his duty, but he doesn't have the first idea how to reach a traumatized boy. That's why you're here. What happened to the previous governess? Governesses, plural. First one lasted a week before she declared Daniel was possessed by demons and fled. Second one tried being stern and strict, which made the boy retreat so far into himself we thought we'd lost him entirely. Third one tried to baby him, treating him like he was made of glass. He threw a book at her head and locked himself in his room for 2 days. Brennan glanced at her. So, tell me, Miss Colvin, what's your approach going to be? Sarah considered the question seriously. Honesty, patience, and treating him like a person who's suffered trauma, not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be figured out. I'm going to meet him where he is, not where I think he should be. That might work, Brennan said grudgingly, or it might fail just like everything else, but at least you're thinking about it like a human being instead of a strategy. As the sun dropped toward the western horizon, Twin Rivers Ranch revealed itself gradually, first as a dark smudge against the endless prairie, then as distinct buildings that grew larger and more impressive with each mile. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch and more windows than Sarah could count from a distance. Barns and outbuildings dotted the landscape like a small town, connected by fenced corrals where horses moved, like living shadows in the fading light. This wasn't a ranch. This was a kingdom. Mr. Kane built the main house 5 years ago, Brennan said, noting her stunned expression. Brought in craftsmen from Denver, used the best materials money could buy. Some folks said he was putting on airs, building something that fancy when he didn't even have a wife to fill it. But Kane doesn't do anything for show. He built it because he could, because he wanted something permanent and solid, something that would outlast him. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, just as the last light drained from the sky. Lamps glowed in several windows, warm and welcoming against the gathering darkness. Sarah climbed down on legs that had gone stiff from hours of sitting, accepting Brennan's hand out of necessity rather than delicacy. Mr. Kane's in his office, Brennan said, gesturing toward the house. He'll want to meet you before you see Daniel. Fair warning, he's not much for social pleasantries. He'll ask you direct questions and expect direct answers. I can manage direct, Sarah said, lifting her chin. Brennan almost smiled. Yeah, I think maybe you can. The house's interior matched its impressive exterior. Hardwood floors polished to a gleam, furniture that was substantial and well made without being ostentatious, and everywhere evidence of serious money spent seriously. No frivolous decorations, no unnecessary flourishes. Everything served a purpose. Everything was built to last. A door opened down the hall, and a man emerged who could only be Garrett Kane. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from years of hard physical labour rather than leisure athletics. His hair was dark brown, shot through with premature silver, worn slightly longer than was fashionable. His face was all hard angles and weathered planes, aged more by sun and wind than by years. She guessed him to be perhaps 38, though he carried himself with the authority of someone much older. But it was his eyes that held Sarah's attention. Pale grey, almost colourless, with an intensity that felt like being assessed by something wild and predatory. These were eyes that missed nothing, that calculated everything, that had seen enough hardship to have stripped away any tolerance for weakness or deception. "Miss Colvin." His voice was deep, rough-edged, with the kind of Western drawl that suggested he'd been out here long enough to have absorbed the land's character. "Garrett Kane, thank you for making the journey." He extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling calluses that proved he worked alongside his men rather than simply directing them. His grip was firm, but not crushing, brief, but not dismissive. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Kane." "Let's not pretend this is an opportunity," Kane said bluntly, gesturing for her to follow him into the office. "This is desperation on both our parts. You need the money, and I need someone who can reach Daniel before he disappears entirely into wherever he's hiding inside his own head. If you can do that, you'll earn every penny I'm paying you. If you can't, you'll still be better compensated than you would be washing clothes in Denver." The office was masculine and functional, a large desk covered with ledgers and correspondence, shelves lined with books that showed actual use, maps on the walls marking property boundaries and water sources. Kane gestured for Sarah to sit while he remained standing, clearly more comfortable in motion than at rest. "Tell me about your qualifications," he said, "and I don't mean your teaching certificate or your references. Tell me why you think you can help a boy who's lost everything." Sarah met his pale eyes steadily. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything. My parents died when I was 16. Cholera epidemic. My fiancé died 3 days before our wedding, thrown from a horse. I lost my teaching position because the town decided I was too sad to be around children. I've been scraping by in Denver for 8 months, watching my savings disappear, wondering if I'd end up on the street or worse." She paused. "I understand what it means to have your world destroyed in an instant, and I understand that healing isn't about getting over it or moving on. It's about learning to carry the weight without letting it crush you." Kane's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. "Daniel hasn't cried since the accident, hasn't spoken, barely eats. He sits in his room and stares at nothing for hours. The doctor says there's nothing physically wrong with him. This is all trauma, but knowing that doesn't help me reach him." "Why did you take him in?" Sarah asked. "You could have found him a family in Cheyenne, people with experience raising children. Why bring him here?" "Because he's blood," Kane said simply, as if that explained everything. "Because Robert was my brother, even though we didn't see eye to eye on much. Because that boy deserves better than being shuffled off to strangers while his uncle lives in a house with more empty rooms than any one man needs." His jaw tightened. "And because I made a promise." "To your brother?" "To myself. That if anything ever happened to Robert and Marie, I'd take care of their boy. I just never thought I'd have to keep that promise." Sometimes the hardest promises are the ones we make to ourselves. Sometimes duty becomes love, without us noticing the transformation. This is that kind of story. Kane led Sarah up the wide staircase to the second floor, where the hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that presumably led to the bedrooms Brennan had mentioned. He stopped in front of one door near the end of the hall, his hand on the knob. "He hasn't come out for dinner in 3 days," Kane said quietly. "I've been bringing trays up, leaving them outside his door. Sometimes he eats, sometimes he doesn't. The doctor says not to, force it, that he'll eat when he's hungry enough. But watching him waste away," his hand clenched on the doorknob. "I can run a ranch, manage thousands of head of cattle, negotiate contracts that would make grown men weep. But I don't know how to help one small boy." "Let me try," Sarah said gently. Kane knocked twice. "Daniel, I've brought someone to meet you. Her name is Miss Colvin, and she's going to be staying with us for a while." He opened the door without waiting for a response that wouldn't come. The room was large and well appointed. A bed big enough for an adult, a desk and chair positioned by the window, shelves filled with books and a few carefully chosen toys. But it felt empty despite the furnishings, as if the space itself was holding its breath. Daniel Kane sat in the window seat, his legs pulled up to his chest, arms wrapped around his knees. He was small for 9, thin in a way that suggested recent weight loss, with dark hair that needed cutting and his uncle's pale grey eyes. Those eyes fixed on Sarah as she entered, assessing her with the same intensity his uncle had shown, but with an additional layer of wariness, of pain so deep it seemed to have hollowed him out from the inside. His left arm was still in a sling, healing from the break Brennan had mentioned. Sarah could see fading bruises on his face and neck, the visible evidence of an accident that had stolen everything from him. "Hello, Daniel," Sarah said, staying near the door rather than approaching. "I'm Sarah Colvin. Your uncle hired me to be your tutor and companion. I know you've had other tutors who didn't work out, and I know you probably don't want another stranger in your house. But I'm going to tell you the truth right from the start, because I think you deserve that." The boy's expression didn't change, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. "The truth is that I need this job very badly. I lost my parents when I was not much older than you. I lost my fiancée right before we were supposed to get married. I lost my teaching position because people thought I was too sad to be around their children. I've been living in a boarding house in Denver, barely making enough money to eat, wondering what would happen when I ran out completely." Sarah moved a few steps closer, slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Your uncle offered me a chance to have a real home again, to do work that matters, to have enough money to not constantly worry about surviving. So yes, I'm here because I'm desperate, but I'm also here because I think maybe I can understand what you're going through better than most adults." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real reaction he'd shown. "I'm not going to tell you that everything will be okay," Sarah continued. "I'm not going to promise that the pain will go away or that you'll forget your parents. I'm not even going to promise that I'll stay forever, because life has taught me that sometimes promises get broken no matter how much we mean them." She took another step closer. "But I will promise this. As long as I'm here, I will be honest with you. I will listen when you're ready to talk, and I do believe you'll talk again when you're ready, not when someone forces you. I will respect your grief instead of trying to fix it, and I will be someone you can trust to tell you the truth even when it's hard." The silence stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if she'd miscalculated entirely. Then Daniel reached out to the desk beside the window seat and pulled over a slate and piece of chalk. He wrote in careful, precise letters, "Do you still miss them?" Sarah's throat tightened. "Every single day. Missing them doesn't get smaller. You just get bigger around it. You learn to carry it without letting it destroy you." Daniel wrote again. "How?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. "I'm still figuring that out myself. Maybe we can figure it out together." The boy studied her for a long moment, those pale, grey eyes searching for any hint of deception or condescension. Then he wrote one more word. "Okay." Behind her, Sarah heard Kane release a breath he'd apparently been holding. She didn't turn to look at him, keeping her attention on Daniel. "Can I sit down?" she asked, gesturing to the desk chair. Daniel nodded. Sarah pulled the chair over near the window seat, but not too close, maintaining the distance the boy clearly needed. "Your uncle tells me you like to read?" What's your favourite book? Daniel's hand moved across the slate. Treasure Island. Excellent choice. Have you read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer? It's about a boy who gets into all kinds of trouble and has adventures on the Mississippi River. A tiny nod. What about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? Captain Nemo and the Nautilus exploring the ocean depths? Another nod, but this time accompanied by the faintest hint of interest in his expression. I brought some books with me, Sarah said. Not many. I could only carry what fit in my trunk. But I have a few Jules Verne novels, some Mark Twain, and a collection of Robert Louis Stevenson short stories. Would you like to borrow any of them? Daniel wrote, Yes, please. I'll bring them by tomorrow, and maybe, if you feel up to it, we could read together sometimes. You don't have to talk. You could just listen, or we could take turns reading passages, whatever feels comfortable. Tomorrow? Daniel wrote, his expression wary. Yes. I'm not going anywhere tonight. Your uncle has given me a room down the hall. I'll be here for breakfast tomorrow, and lunch, and dinner, and the day after that, and the day after that. Sarah smiled slightly. You're stuck with me for a while, I'm afraid. For the first time since she'd entered the room, something that might have been the ghost of a smile flickered across Daniel's face. It vanished almost immediately, but it had been there, unmistakable evidence that the boy wasn't completely lost inside his grief. When grief steals everything, sometimes the smallest victories, a shared book, a slate message, the ghost of a smile, become the foundation for rebuilding a shattered world. Stay with this story. The healing has only just begun. Sarah's room was 3 doors down from Daniel's, smaller than his, but still more spacious and better appointed than anywhere she'd lived in the past year. The bed was solid and comfortable, the wardrobe more than adequate for her modest possessions. A washstand with a pitcher and basin stood in the corner, and the window looked out over the eastern pastures where the first stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. She was unpacking her trunk when a knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Garrett Kane entered, his large frame somehow seeming out of place in the refined bedroom. He held a tray with covered dishes, steam rising from beneath the lids. "Brennan said you didn't eat during the journey. Thought you might be hungry." "I am, actually, thank you." Sarah took the tray and set it on the small table by the window. "That was kind of you." Kane shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. "You got him to communicate. That's more than anyone else has managed in 47 days. 48, Sarah corrected. It's been 48 days since the accident. Something shifted in Kane's expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd calculated it so precisely. "You were counting too." "I always count. Days, dollars, steps. It's how I maintain control when everything else feels chaotic." Sarah lifted the cover from one of the dishes, revealing a thick stew with chunks of beef and vegetables. The smell made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. "How long have you been counting?" "Since the moment Tom Brennan rode up to tell me my brother was dead and I had a nephew who needed me." Kane remained standing by the door, as if uncertain whether he should stay or leave. 63 days, every single one of them, wondering if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm helping or making it worse. "You're doing the right thing," Sarah said firmly. "Keeping him here, giving him stability, not forcing him to speak before he's ready, those are all the right choices." "Then why does it feel like I'm failing him?" "Because love always feels like failure when you can't stop someone you care about from hurting. You can't take his pain away, Mr. Kane, no matter how much you want to. All you can do is be present while he learns to carry it." Kane was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes studying her with that unsettling intensity. "You speak from experience." "Yes." "Your fiancé, what was his name?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Most people avoided mentioning Thomas, as if speaking his name would somehow make her grief worse. Thomas Whitmore. He was a carpenter, one of the best in Denver. He built beautiful things, furniture, cabinets, even a music box that played a Chopin nocturne. Her voice, threatened to break, and she steadied it with effort. He was kind and patient and made me laugh. And then one morning he went for a ride because the day was beautiful, and he died for absolutely no reason at all. I'm sorry. So am I. Sarah forced herself to take a bite of the stew, though it suddenly tasted like ash. But being sorry doesn't bring them back. It doesn't make the pain stop, it just is. Kane moved further into the room, his movements careful, as if he were navigating around invisible obstacles. I've never lost anyone like that, never let myself care enough about anyone for their death to destroy me. I told myself it was strength, self-sufficiency. Now I wonder if it was just cowardice. Why? Sarah asked. Why did you never marry? A man of your success, your resources? Surely you had opportunities. I had opportunities, Kane admitted. Women who saw the ranch and the money and decided I would make a suitable husband. Women who could calculate my net worth faster than I could. Women who wanted to be the wife of the largest landowner in 3 counties. His jaw tightened. I never met a woman who wanted me. Just Garrett Kane, the man, rather than everything that came with the name. That must be lonely. Lonely is safe. Lonely means no one can disappoint you or abandon you or die and leave you broken. He paused. Or at least, that's what I thought until Robert died, and Daniel came here, and I realized that trying to protect yourself from pain just means you're alone when the pain comes anyway. Sarah set down her spoon and looked at this hard, successful man who'd built an empire but had never let anyone close enough to share it. It's not too late, you know, to let people in, to take the risk. Isn't it? Kane's smile was bitter. I'm 38 years old, Miss Colvin. I've spent 2 decades building walls instead of bridges. I'm not sure I know how to be anything other than what I am. Daniel needs you to learn. He needs someone who can show him that surviving trauma doesn't mean shutting yourself off from ever caring again. And what if I teach him the wrong lesson? What if I show him that isolation is the only way to protect yourself from more pain? Then I'll be here to show him the alternative, Sarah said quietly. That's why you hired me, isn't it? Not just to teach him reading and arithmetic, but to be someone who's survived loss and is still willing to be vulnerable, still willing to connect. Kane stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something in his pale eyes that might have been recognition or hope or the beginning of respect. You're more than I expected, Miss Colvin. So are you, Mr. Kane. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Thank you for coming, for taking a chance on a difficult situation with no guarantee of success, for being honest with Daniel instead of trying to coddle or fix him, for... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. For being here. After he left, Sarah sat by the window eating her stew and watching the stars emerge one by one over the endless Wyoming prairie. She thought about the boy down the hall, trapped inside his grief. She thought about the man who'd hired her, trapped inside his self-imposed isolation. She thought about herself, trapped between the life she'd lost and the uncertain future she was trying to build. Maybe they were all trapped in different ways. Maybe healing meant finding a way out together. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Sarah woke each morning to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of ranch operations beginning below, horses being fed, cattle being moved, men calling instructions to each other in the pre-dawn darkness. She dressed in practical clothing that Garrett Kane had provided without her asking. Split riding skirts, sturdy blouses, boots that could handle both indoor work and outdoor exploration. Breakfast was served in Maids, the main dining room, a large space that could have accommodated 20 people, but usually held only 3, Sarah, Kane, and Daniel. The boy still didn't speak, but he came to meals now instead of hiding in his room. He ate more, though still not enough, and he listened with obvious attention when Sarah or Kane talked about the day's plans, ranch business, or anything else that filled the silence. Mornings were for lessons. Sarah started with the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, and quickly realized that Daniel was far ahead of where most 9-year-olds would be. His mother had clearly been an excellent teacher, and the boy had inherited a sharp mind that processed information quickly and retained it completely. So Sarah adjusted, bringing in more challenging material: geography, history, basic science, literature that would make most adults struggle. Daniel communicated entirely through his slate, writing responses to questions, asking for clarifications, occasionally offering observations that revealed the keen intelligence still functioning behind his silence. Sarah never pushed him to speak aloud, never suggested that writing wasn't enough. She simply accepted his chosen method of communication and moved forward. Afternoons were more flexible. Sometimes they read together on the porch, Sarah choosing books she thought would capture his interest: adventure stories, explorations of distant lands, tales of survival against impossible odds. Sometimes they walked the ranch grounds, observing the horses being trained, watching calves being branded, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Daniel seemed to relax outdoors, his shoulders losing some of their perpetual tension, his expression softening when he watched newborn foals or helped Sarah collect interesting rocks for their growing geology collection. And always Garrett Kane watched. Not intrusively, but Sarah was constantly aware of his presence, joining them for the midday meal, asking about their progress during dinner, occasionally appearing during their afternoon explorations with some ranch business that just happened to bring him near where they were working. He was, Sarah realized, learning how to be a parent, learning how to connect with Daniel through patient observation and small gestures, learning how to show care without overwhelming the boy with expectations or demands. One evening, about 6 weeks after Sarah's arrival, she found Kane in his office reviewing ledgers by lamplight. She knocked on the open door. "Do you have a moment?" He looked up, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her, a softening that happened so quickly she might have imagined it. "Always. Come in." Sarah entered and took the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about Daniel's progress. He's doing better. I can see it. He's eating more, sleeping without nightmares most nights. He's engaging with the lessons instead of just going through the motions." Kane set down his pen. "You've worked a miracle, Miss Colvin." "Not a miracle, just patience and honesty. But there's something you should know. He wrote something on his slate today that I think is significant." Kane's expression sharpened with concern. "What did he write?" "We were reading Robinson Crusoe, and we got to the part where Crusoe finds footprints on the beach and realizes he's not alone on the island. Daniel wrote, 'Sometimes being alone is easier than being with people who can leave.'" Kane's face went carefully blank. That's how he sees the world now. Everyone leaves. His parents left. His previous tutors left. Why should he believe anyone will stay? Exactly. So I told him that yes, people leave sometimes. Through death, through choice, through circumstances we can't control. But that doesn't mean connection isn't worth the risk. That being alone might feel safer, but it's not the same as being alive. How did he respond? He wrote, "Uncle Garrett stays." And then he looked at me and wrote, "Will you stay?" Kane leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I can't promise forever, because life has taught me that promises can break. But that I can promise today, and tomorrow, and every day after that, until circumstances change. That staying isn't just about making a promise, it's about choosing every day to keep choosing." That's more honest than most people would be with a 9-year-old. He deserves honesty, not comfortable lies. Sarah paused, knowing she was about to venture into dangerous territory. He also wrote something else. He wrote, "Uncle Garrett is lonely too." Kane's expression shuttered completely. "That's not appropriate for him to—" "He's not wrong, though, is he?" Sarah interrupted gently. "You've built this incredible ranch, created something from nothing, achieved more success than most men dream of. But you did it alone. You've kept everyone at arm's length your entire adult life, and now you have a nephew who needs you to show him that connection is possible, that letting people in doesn't automatically lead to pain. You presume a great deal, Miss Colvin. I do. Because I see you watching him, wanting to help him, wanting to be the guardian he needs. But you're terrified that you'll fail him the way you think you failed your brother, that you'll let him down, or abandon him emotionally, or somehow prove inadequate to the task of loving a traumatized child. Kane stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't know anything about my relationship with my brother. Then tell me, Sarah said, standing as well but not backing down. Tell me why you think you failed him. Tell me why you're punishing yourself by refusing to connect with anyone. Tell me why a man as successful and capable as you believes he's somehow unworthy of the same love and family he's trying to provide for Daniel. The silence crackled with tension. Kane's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his pale eyes blazing with emotions he clearly didn't know how to process. Sarah could see him wrestling with the choice, to shut down and retreat behind his walls, or to take the terrifying risk of being vulnerable. Robert wanted to borrow money, Kane finally said, his voice rough. 3 years ago. His ranch was failing, he had debts piling up, and he came to me asking for help. I said no. I told him that I'd built my success through hard work and smart decisions, and that I wouldn't enable his poor management. I told him he needed to learn to stand on his own instead of coming to his wealthy brother every time things got difficult. Sarah's heart ached at the guilt in his voice. He left angry. We didn't speak for a year. Then Marie, his wife, wrote to me saying they were struggling but managing, that Robert was too proud to reach out again, but that she wanted me to know they were surviving. I sent money anyway, anonymously, through the bank, told myself I was helping while respecting his pride. Kane's voice cracked. The wagon accident happened because they were using an old wagon with worn wheels, because they couldn't afford to repair it properly. If I'd just given him the money directly, if I'd swallowed my pride and my lectures about self-sufficiency, they'd still be alive. You don't know that, Sarah said quietly. The accident could have happened anyway. Life is full of terrible coincidences that have nothing to do with the choices we make. But I'll never know for certain, will I? I'll never know if my refusal to help killed my brother. Kane's hands unclenched slowly. So yes, I'm terrified of failing Daniel, because I already failed his father, and I can't bear the thought of failing him too. Sarah moved around the desk until she stood directly in front of him, close enough to see the pain etched into his features. Garrett Kane, listen to me. You did not kill your brother. You made a choice based on the information you had and the values you believed in. Maybe it was the wrong choice, maybe it wasn't, but it was a human choice made by a fallible person trying to do what he thought was right. That's not the same as being responsible for his death. It feels the same. I know. Grief and guilt feel identical. But Daniel doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be present. He needs you to show him that people can survive devastating loss and still choose connection, still choose love, still choose to build something meaningful instead of hiding behind walls. Kane's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just someone who's made different choices than you. I chose to keep being vulnerable even after Thomas died. It hurt more in the short term, but it meant I didn't have to spend years trapped in isolation, wondering if I was capable of connection. I'm not sure I know how to be any different than I am. Then learn. Start with Daniel. Practice letting him see your emotions, your uncertainty, your humanity. Let him see that being strong doesn't mean being invulnerable. Sarah's voice softened. And maybe practice with me too. I promise not to judge you for being human. When two broken people find each other in the middle of nowhere, when they choose to be brave enough to connect despite every reason to stay isolated, that's when healing truly begins. This is where everything changes. Kane's thumb traced her cheekbone with a tenderness that made Sarah's breath catch. I hired you to help Daniel. I didn't expect you to help me." "I'm full of surprises," Sarah managed, her heart racing. "Sarah." The way he said her name, soft, careful, as if it were precious, made something inside her chest crack open. "I know this is inappropriate. I know I'm your employer, and you're in a vulnerable position, and I have no right to feel what I'm feeling. But I can't seem to stop myself from wanting to be near you, from listening for your voice, from looking forward to every meal just because you'll be there." "That's not inappropriate," Sarah whispered. "That's just honest. I'm falling in love with you." The words came out like a confession, rough and uncertain. "I've been falling in love with you since the first night you sat in Daniel's room and told him the truth instead of pretty lies. Since I watched you treat him with respect instead of pity. Since you stood in this office and called me out on my isolation and my fear and my stubborn refusal to let anyone close." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Garrett, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving your fiancé. I know I have no right to ask you for anything beyond the job I hired you for. But I need you to know that you've become essential to me in ways that have nothing to do with Daniel and everything to do with the fact that you make me want to be better, braver, more human." "I'm falling in love with you too," Sarah said, the truth spilling out before she could second-guess it. "I didn't think I could. I thought my heart died with Thomas, that I'd never feel that kind of hope again. But you've shown me that it's possible to survive loss and still choose joy, that building a life doesn't betray the people we've lost. It honors them." Kane pulled her closer, his other hand settling at her waist. "What do we do with this? How do we navigate falling in love when there's a traumatized child depending on both of us to provide stability?" "Very carefully," Sarah said. "We tell Daniel the truth when it feels right. We make sure he knows that our feelings for each other don't diminish our commitment to him. We show him that love doesn't have to be dangerous or destructive. It can be something that makes everyone stronger." "When did you become the brave one?" "I've always been brave. I just didn't know it until I had to be." Sarah rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief and full of promise. "We're going to figure this out, Garrett. All three of us together." The months that followed were a delicate dance of building trust on multiple fronts. Sarah and Garrett kept their relationship quiet at first, stealing moments alone after Daniel was asleep, learning each other's histories and hopes in whispered conversations on the porch. But they were careful never to let their growing intimacy disrupt the stability Daniel needed. The boy continued to improve steadily. He started speaking again, first in single words, then short sentences, eventually full conversations that revealed the intelligent, thoughtful child he'd been before trauma had stolen his voice. He still had nightmares occasionally, still sometimes retreated into silence when memories became overwhelming. But he was healing, slowly but genuinely. One evening in early autumn, about 5 months after Sarah's arrival, Daniel found her and Garrett sitting together on the porch swing, Garrett's arm around her shoulders. The boy stopped in the doorway, his expression thoughtful rather than upset. "Are you going to get married?" he asked bluntly. Sarah and Garrett exchanged glances. They'd been discussing this exact question for weeks, trying to decide the right timing to talk to Daniel about their feelings. "We've talked about it," Garrett said honestly, "but we wanted to make sure you were comfortable with the idea first." Daniel considered this seriously. "Will you send me away if you have your own children?" "Never," Garrett said firmly. "You're my nephew, my family. That doesn't change regardless of what happens between me and Sarah." "Will you leave if you marry Uncle Garrett?" Daniel asked Sarah. "No. I'd stay here, on the ranch, with both of you. We'd be a family, all three of us together." Daniel climbed up onto the swing between them, a position he hadn't taken since he was much younger. "I think you should get married. Uncle Garrett smiles more when you're around, and you don't look so sad anymore." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "What about you? Are you less sad?" "Sometimes," Daniel admitted. "I still miss my parents. I think about them every day." but it doesn't hurt as much as it used to. And I know they'd want me to be happy, not stay sad forever." "They would be so proud of how brave you've been," Garrett said, his voice thick with emotion. "So proud of how hard you've worked to heal." "Will you tell me about them sometimes?" Daniel asked. "About my father when he was young? About what he was like before I was born?" "I'll tell you everything I remember," Garrett promised. "The good and the complicated and everything in between. Your father was a good man who loved you very much, even though he and I didn't always see eye to eye." That night, after Daniel was asleep, Garrett found Sarah in her room. He didn't knock, just opened the door and stood in the doorway with an expression that made her breath catch. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because it's practical, or because Daniel needs a mother figure. Marry me because I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. Because you've taught me that walls don't protect you, they just keep you from living. Because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life choosing you the way you taught me to choose connection over safety." Sarah crossed the room and took his hands. "Yes. Yes to all of it." They married 6 weeks later in the ranch's main room, with Daniel standing beside them as the only witness besides Tom Brennan and the circuit preacher who'd made the long journey from Cheyenne. Sarah wore a simple dress of deep green wool that Garrett had ordered from Denver, practical and beautiful in equal measure. Garrett wore a new suit that made him look slightly uncomfortable, but devastatingly handsome. Daniel wore his Sunday best and held the rings with the seriousness of someone entrusted with a crucial mission. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Daniel spoke up clearly. "I don't object. I think it's about time." The gathering erupted in laughter, and even the preacher cracked a smile. After the ceremony, as snow began to fall soft and thick outside the windows, the three of them sat together by the fire. Daniel leaned against Sarah's side, while Garrett's arm encircled them both, and for the first time since his parents' death, the boy looked completely at peace. "We're a family now," Daniel said quietly. "A real family." "We've been a family for months," Sarah corrected gently. "This just makes it official." "Will you have babies?" Daniel asked with the frank curiosity of children. "Maybe," Garrett said. "Would that be all right with you?" "I think I'd like to be a big brother, as long as everyone knows I was here first." "Everyone will know," Sarah promised. "You're our first child, Daniel. That doesn't change regardless of who else might join our family." Years later, when Daniel was grown and running a significant portion of the Twin Rivers operation himself, when Sarah and Garrett's 3 younger children had all left home for school or marriage or adventures of their own, the two of them sat on that same porch swing where they'd first acknowledged their love. "Any regrets?" Garrett asked, the question that had become a ritual between them. "Not a single one," Sarah said, resting her head on his shoulder. "You?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner, that I wasted so many years building walls instead of looking for someone to build a life with. We found each other when we needed to. Daniel needed us both, and we needed him to teach us how to be brave enough to love despite the risk of loss." Garrett kissed the top of her head. "That boy saved us as much as we saved him." "That's what family does," Sarah said. "We save each other, over and over, in ways big and small." The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden in the setting sun, dotted with cattle that bore the Twin Rivers brand and horses that were sought after across 3 territories. But the real empire wasn't measured in acres or cattle or wealth. It was measured in the family they'd built from broken pieces, in the love that had grown from honesty and patience, and the courage to be vulnerable. Sometimes the greatest success isn't what we build with our hands, it's what we build with our hearts. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone in despite every reason to stay protected. Sometimes a job posting, a desperate choice, and a traumatized child become the foundation for a love that transforms everyone it touches. This is that story. This is how broken people become whole. This is how isolation becomes connection, how duty becomes love, how survival becomes genuine living. If this story reminded you that healing is possible, that love can grow from the hardest circumstances, that family is something we build rather than something we're simply born into, then you've found exactly what you were searching for. This is what happens when we're brave enough to be honest, when we choose connection despite the fear of loss, when we let broken people help each other heal. Subscribe for more stories that prove the human heart's capacity for resilience, redemption, and extraordinary love, born from ordinary courage. Share this tale with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to let someone in, to build a family, to choose vulnerability over safety. Because sometimes the greatest ranches aren't measured in acres, they're measured in the love that fills them.